We're back with part 3 of lectures 19 and 20 on the Cold War. Let's take a look at one of the first proxy wars in this ongoing grudge match between the US and the USSR. What happens in Korea? Now first let's get our bearings. The Korean Peninsula is right next to China. Remember, China by 1949 has turned into a communist nation. This means that the fate of the Korean Peninsula is very much of interest to the United States and its Western allies, as they do not want to see this area of the world succumb to communist infiltration. So the Korean conflict will be the first major test of this Truman Doctrine containment policy. Now, after World War II, the Japanese were run out of the Korean Peninsula, and the country sort of unofficially became divided along the 38th parallel. You can see it here on the map. Now, what do I mean by divided? We see that in North Korea that Communist China would love for Korea to become a unified country and a communist one at that. In South Korea, though, you have American officials there, British officials there, Western allies. They would like to see Korea become a unified country after World War II, but they want it to become a capitalist country. So there was sort of an uneasy understanding between the communist-dominated North Korea and the Western supported South Korea, that the 38th parallel was, you just didn't cross it. Now this war becomes an open conflict in the summer of 1950 when North Korean forces, without warning, crossed the 38th parallel and invaded the South. President Truman felt that the United States must take decisive action. So we will see that he will order troops into South Korea and will also approach the United Nations about a joint mission, getting the Security Council of the United Nations to approve the use of force to protect the residents of South Korea. Now for North Korean troops, they are enjoying the support of China, Communist China, and to a certain extent also the Communist Soviet Union. So that's why I call this a classic example of a proxy war. While you have U.S. troops directly involved, they are never firing upon Soviet soldiers. They're never firing upon Chinese soldiers, because that would end up escalating this into likely a nuclear war. So the Korean War will rage for several years. We will see that over time, the UN forces, with the support of the United States, will manage to push the North Korean forces back north of the 38th parallel. They'll actually get very close to pushing North Korean forces almost to the border between that country and China. But China begins reinforcing their North Korean troops, pushing the American-backed forces south, eventually, of the 38th parallel. In the end, neither side is going to prevail in this conflict. A ceasefire will finally be called in July of 1951, but it took 2 more years of peace negotiations, with more casualties in the meantime, until the war finally came to an end. And the war ends exactly where it began. North Korea will become a communist country north of the 38th parallel. South Korea will become a Western-style capitalist democracy established south of the 38th parallel. And to the present day, this remains a very tense region. We'll also see that this was a tragedy. The Korean War is sometimes termed the Forgotten War because there was never a formal declaration of war by either side. Instead, remember, Truman had sort of declared a national emergency, and the United Nations had taken collective action to fight off North Korean aggression. But this was very much a real war. During the conflict, the United States alone lost 54,000 soldiers and suffered 100,000 men wounded. Even more chilling was the fact that some 4 million Koreans died, mostly civilians, due to bombing, famine, wartime displacement, disease, and the like. And even today, the demilitarized zone here between North and South Korea is on a hair trigger. Tensions between these two countries can escalate almost overnight. Unfortunately, the bad blood of the past has not gone away. We also need to say a word or two about the election of 1952, the presidential contest that takes place right in the middle of the Korean conflict. The fact that the war was still not over invited plenty of Republican critics in this contest. Many of them began using the tagline against the Democrats in this election of Korea, corruption, and communism, that they will claim that the Democratic Party under Truman's leadership had lagged behind, that they had not done enough to contain the threat of communism. The Republican nominee for president in 1952 will also be a wildly popular choice with most Americans. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces during World War II, was a household name, and he will be running on the Republican ticket that year. He will choose a California senator by the name of Richard Nixon to serve as his vice president. We'll see that Ike or President Eisenhower will quite easily win the 1952 campaign. He stated that the Korean War was never inevitable, he said. It was never inescapable. But now that the United States was involved, he planned to see it through. This kind of decisive language resonated with many Americans, and the fact that he stood up before the American people and actually declared Korea a war instead of, trying to downplay it like Truman had, this earned him a lot of votes that year. We'll talk more about Eisenhower's terms as President of the United States in the next lecture.